chosen at that stage. We don't know why they were chosen, on what grounds they were. If you look at the issue of Butler Sloss and Fiona Woolf, the two chairs who resigned, the due diligence which the Home Office did on them was very poor. You could go on Google and check the huge conflicts of interest which they had in terms of taking this inquiry forward. And we had the same worry about the panel itself, that they were compromised, potentially compromised. What we're saying to Theresa May is, yes, we agree that we need to start again, and we welcome you starting again. And one of the basic reasons is this is probably one of the darkest inquiries which has ever been done by the British government, because it goes right to the highest level, allegedly, and it involves all sorts of members of the establishment. And if we listen to the police, it also involves allegations of murder and so forth. Now, if you've got a conflict of interest, then there's a problem, because this inquiry's got to look into the darkest places. People cannot shine a light into that darkness if they fear they're going to see themselves in there.
You mentioned the police. I wonder all the resources that would go into this public inquiry, and the cost will run into tens of millions if, say, the Savile inquiry into Bloody Sunday's anything to go by. In a sense, why bother with a public inquiry? Why not take all those resources, all that money, and give it to the police? I believe it's called Operation Midland, isn't it? And just bring these people to account. Let's just get some arrests and convictions. Isn't that the best way of getting to the bottom of this, rather than talking about it for years and years and years?
In many ways, yes, I agree with you. What the inquiry's done actually is taking it onto a different level in terms of mobilising the public and survivors and so forth. Personally, yes, if we could have confidence that the police weren't going to be railroaded again, so at least this inquiry has the chance to work alongside the police in terms of pushing the police and raising the question, well, how we need to take this further. We want answers on this. Actually, the police should be working. In that letter, we call for the police, a dedicated police team, to work with the inquiry so that the two go hand in hand to bring people to justice. It does need survivor involvement, especially, and the people's involvement in this, in order to give the police the power to their elbow. There's 11 million estimated survivors of child abuse, not institutional and organised child abuse, but child abuse in this country. And that's why it's worth spending the money, if you like, because that abuse impacts on obesity, it impacts on mental health, it impacts in all sorts of layers which are costing.
11 million's a huge number. I mean, yeah. That represents roughly as many children there are in the country at this moment.
That's about one in 5, 1 in 6 of the population. That's the estimates which have come through, and that eats into the soul of society. All those secrets. Imagine 11 million secrets where people can't really talk to people on this issue. That's why it's so taboo.
Can I ask you what your experience was of it? What was your experience of being in care for your entire young life?
For me, it was my childhood. I was virtually all that time in children's homes, quite sizable children's homes, from like 20 to 40 or so, and there were positives in the sense that we were a group of young people, we were a group of children. It was a children's world we were in, but then there was a routine physical abuse, which was probably quite common in the days of the 60s and so forth. That was quite routine anyway. But we have, I found out later how quite a few of the children were abused, even sexually abused by female staff. And then we had a man came into the home as the boss, and it wasn't only physical abuse with him, it was sexual abuse as well. I was moved out because I was the oldest and probably the strongest, and into a family which turned out to be abusive, a foster family. And so by the time I was 16, I was in school and living in a bedsit to finish my studies. But the kids there, they continued to suffer. Others raised issues, and they were moved out of the home. And only when there was a revolt, almost like Selma style, where the kids refused to get off the bus until the police came and dealt with it, only then did they get rid of this abuser from the home. So it took us a huge struggle. It took children. And that's what upsets me most, really. It's children who have to be the heroes in all this. Yeah? And that shouldn't be the case. Yeah? It's about people taking responsibility in society and saying, yes, it was taboo, yes, it may have happened to people I know, to me, and so forth, but now we've got a chance to get it right. And that's the whole thing about the inquiry, is a chance to get it right. Not only in terms of police investigations, but also in terms of the whole of the establishment being brought to book in the different ways, the cover-ups and so forth. You don't start sweeping the stairs from the bottom. We need to sweep them from the top. And if that's what the inquiry can do, that's its potential. Whether it will do that is, that's why we're voicing now.
I think a danger here is, I think, is as follows. I went to a state school, comprehensive school in the West Midlands, and there was children in each year from a children's home in a nearby village, which is now closed. It's not there anymore. And I remember I went for tea in that children's home, and there was, some trouble kids, as you'd imagine, who went there. I still remember them. Played football with one of them, and so on. So I, listening to you now, I find myself thinking, well, what went on in that children's home? What were they up to? What went right? There might be a story there, but crucially, there might not. There were probably some perfectly good children's homes at the time. If you talk in terms of 11 million children suffered abuse, God forbid that's true, but I've got no reason to doubt you, then you start thinking, well, there wasn't a decent children's home in the country. But there must have been decent people involved in this as well. Everyone's tarred with the same brush, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
That's why you need inquiries to clarify these things. Yeah, that's why. I mean, there are. It's very difficult because people don't want to relive these things. They will say, oh yes, our home was okay and okay, but then if you talk to them, you'll find something very different. We lived in a very, very abusive society. If you remember, Adrian, you're probably not as old as me, but the corporal punishment, the physical punishment, to the extent that if the masters at school were weak with us, we would almost destroy them, because it was literally dog eat dog. Yeah, it was vital. I stood while a kid got punched in the nose by his teacher. That type of thing was going on. So it wasn't.
But it was beat or be beaten.
Beat or be beaten, yeah. And it was a very aggressive, nasty society. Compared to the young people today are lambs, like compared to how we were brought up.
But see, those who are guilty of it or stand accused of it will use that argument, though, won't they, before a public inquiry or any kind of prosecution? These were different times. If I didn't beat the kid would beat me. Does that become some kind of defence? On the question of beatings, yes, it was legal to beat at the time, but it's a question of how far it went. For example, I was horrified. I read Hansard from 1952, where there's an MP complaining when he raised the issue of flogging and excessive flogging at approved schools, at children's homes around the country, that the MPs were laughing and joking about it, that they thought this was some type of fun thing. Now, there's one thing about punishment, and there's another about brutality, and which is also linked often with. But there's a big grey area there. There was a grey area then, and there's an even bigger grey area looking at it retrospectively. There's
everything is grey in many ways. Everything is grey, and that's the job. That's why it takes proper discussion and not just trying to put everything black and white. If you want everything black and white, there's always going to be a problem with that. And there's a problem with abuse. It's never completely black and white like some people try and portray. It's our job to have intelligent discussions over this and raise with those people. The people who use that type of defence, it's no defence to brutality. And people know the difference between, and if they don't know the difference between brutality and standard punishment, then that just really shows what the problem is.
That's Phil Frampton of the Care Leavers Association. You got a view on that? I mean, if you worked at a perfectly good children's home 20 years ago, and you do feel tarred with the same brush as the awful places, some of the awful people apparently involved, then do get in touch. 0500 909 693. It has just gone 11:30.